In the Second Age of Middle-earth, when Sauron posed as Anatar and convinced the elves of Eregion to craft a set of rings, 9 were given to the great kings of men who became corrupted. 9 rings of power, which gave them wealth and strong magics, granting them long life and invisibility. But over time, the Nazgul, as they became known, had their minds turned to darkness, becoming permanently invisible, with their thoughts and actions guided by the will of Sauron. One of them rose to become the Dark Lord's second in command, and for 1200 years, the Lord of the Nazgul would lead their armies against the free peoples of Middle-earth. But a last alliance of elves and men rose to fight back, and finally achieved victory in the Battle of Dagorlad, then laying siege to Barad-dûr for 7 years, until Sauron himself emerged and fought Gil-galad and Elendil on the slopes of Mount Doom. Although both the elven and human king died in the struggle, they were able to defeat the Dark Lord, allowing for Elendil's son Isildur to take up his father's blade and cut the One Ring of Power from Sauron's hand, destroying his body and scattering the last of his armies. With Sauron vanquished, the Nazgul disappeared from Middle-earth for a time, yet when Isildur chose to keep the One Ring rather than destroy it, Sauron's spirit survived and re-emerged 1,000 years into the Third Age. Now known as the Necromancer, he established his fortress at Dol Guldur, where the Lord of the Nazgul returned to his service, now tasked with the destruction of Arthedain, Rhudaur, and Cardolan, which were once joined together as the Kingdom of Arnor. To raise his armies and prepare for war, the servant of Sauron founded his own kingdom in the far north of the Misty Mountains, with the Lord of the Nazgul given the title Witch-king, Lord of Angmar, raising mighty orc armies to invade the kingdoms of men. First, Rhudaur fell, with their Dunedain king replaced by an ally of Angmar, and then Cardolan, which was destroyed and became haunted by Barrow-wights, restless spirits which would ensure the city was never rebuilt. Yet when the Witch King marched against Arthedain, the elves of Lindon and Rivendell came to their aid, defeating his dark armies. But this was only the beginning, as the Witch King would continue to send his forces against the kingdom of Arthedain for hundreds of years, until 1974 of the Third Age, when Fornost Erain, capital of Arthedain, was captured, and the last remnants of Arnor were destroyed. However, a year later, General Eärnur of Gondor landed at Greyhavens, and led an army of elves and men in the Battle of Fornost, where the Witch King was defeated and Arnor avenged. Yet even in defeat, Sauron was not displeased, as his servant had completed his mission and utterly vanquished the northern kingdoms of men. The Lord of the Ringwraiths then returned to Mordor and began raising his armies to continue their war, this time in the south, with the goal of destroying Gondor, the last great kingdom of men in the west. For centuries he would wage war against them, capturing the eastern half of Osgiliath, and even challenging King Eärnur to single combat, which he eventually accepted, riding off into Mordor, never to be heard from again, thereby breaking the line of kings and leaving Gondor under the rule of stewards. When Sauron at last returned to Mordor, the Nazgul were sent to find a young hobbit named Frodo Baggins, who was in possession of the One Ring, needed by the Dark Lord to regain his greater strength and complete his conquest of Middle-earth. And so the Nazgul tracked the hobbit down to Amon Sul, also known as Weathertop, where the Witch King stabbed Frodo with a Morgul blade before being driven off by Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to the throne of Gondor and Arnor. Once again, they attempted to capture Frodo at the river Bruinen, but here, Elrond, the Lord of Rivendell, released a great flood which the wizard Gandalf formed into the shape of horses to wash away their pursuers, destroying their physical forms and sending their spirits back to Mordor. The Witch King was then called to once again lead the armies of Sauron as they captured the rest of Osgiliath and engaged the forces of Gondor and Rohan in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. For much of the fighting, their victory seemed assured, but when the Witch King saw a chance to kill Theoden of Rohan, he charged against him. Theoden's horse panicked and dropped the king, leaving him at the Nazgul's mercy. Yet Éowyn, the king's niece, and a small hobbit named Merry stood in his way, prepared to defend the king with their lives. Although they normally would stand no chance against him, Merry had been gifted a barrow blade by Tom Bombadil after he, Frodo, Sam, and Pippin fled from the Shire. This weapon was specifically crafted many years earlier by a weaponsmith of Arthedain to defeat the Witch King. And so when the creature stood ready to kill Éowyn, Merry stabbed him in the back of the knee with the enchanted blade, breaking the spell which protected his body and allowing for Éowyn to drive her sword through his head. In this way, the prophecy of Glorfindel was fulfilled, for the Witch King had not died by the hand of a man, but by those of a woman and a hobbit. Sauron's defeat soon followed, as did the destruction of the One Ring, and so peace at last returned to the lands of Middle-earth. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx. like Fabian Keen-Eye Flowers of the Green Shields Mercenary Company, Caesar the Salad of the House Lopez Mexican Company, Edenugruir Spicy Sky Frugran of the Galactic Nemyorg Demonia Trade Company, Johnny Frostbite Rice of the Company of the Rose, and Isle Shadowcat. You all make these videos possible, and I am eternally grateful for your support. If you would like to help Civilization X and gain early access to videos, access to the Patreon-only series Heroes of Lore and Legend, and vote on future content to be produced, you can click on the Patreon link in the description box below and pledge any amount you'd like on a monthly basis. Or if you'd prefer to make a single donation, you can use the PayPal link also in the description below. And please be sure to like and subscribe and click on the links to see more.